For 2 months in the mid-1960s, police and volunteers combed the Pennine Moors for the bodies of 4 missing children, victims of notorious child killers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. The first to go missing in 1963 was 16-year-old Pauline Reed. Then 12-year-old schoolboy John Kilbride disappeared. On the 16th of June 1964, the third victim vanished. He was 13-year-old schoolboy Keith Bennett. 6 months later, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey was snatched from a Boxing Day fairground near her home. By a mixture of good luck and brilliant detective work, the bodies of 2 of the children, Leslie Ann Downey and John Kilbride, were found in shallow graves. For more than 20 years, neither Brady nor Hindley would admit involvement in either of these killings. Then in 1986, an author and a senior police officer, together, created the breakthrough which was to lead to a second search of the moors. Tonight we tell the story of how, after decades of silence, Brady and Hindley finally confessed, and helped bring about the discovery of another of their victims.
I was there on the day the jury went out, and I was there on the day that the jury returned and found them guilty. The judge sentenced them to life imprisonment. The death penalty had been abolished, and they had written into the new act the fact that the judge had the discretion to place a tariff upon the life sentence. In other words, he could say they serve a minimum of 15, 25, 30 years. But the judge made no reference whatsoever to any tariff. And I've got to say that when the judge said, put them down, got up and went out, the first thing they said, well, what's the tariff? What are they going to get? And we approached the barristers, and they eventually went and spoke to the judge. And the judge told them that he had sentenced them to life imprisonment. And life imprisonment was life.
28-year-old Ian Brady was sentenced to life for the murders of Edward Evans, John Kilbride, and Leslie Ann Downey. Hindley, aged 23, received life for the murders of Edward Evans and Leslie Ann Downey, and 7 years for being an accessory after the fact in the killing of John Kilbride.
Part of the trial was designed by Brady to exonerate Myra Hindley, and so thereafter they kept silent about the fact that, first of all, Myra was involved in those killings that were public knowledge, and that, secondly, there were other children buried on the moors. There was a conspiracy of silence which Brady was willing to keep faith with, because he believed that Myra loved him. So he was not willing to spill the beans about her implication in the murders. So for the 20 years between the trial and the day that I knocked on his door in Gartree and introduced myself, they maintained this fiction that there were no other bodies on the moors, that Myra was actually innocent of the deaths. That's why when there were attempts by the police to determine whether other children were victims of Brady and Hindley, they got nowhere, because Brady certainly wasn't going to cooperate with them, and Myra was by now so convinced of her innocence that it was going to take some major shattering experience to break through the myths that she had created around herself that she was actually innocent. So I had the bizarre experience of sitting alone in a cell with the notorious Moors murderer, talking about his experiences, and gradually bringing him round to talking about, to reliving those terrible years where they were actually out on the killing spree. Then it came the day to publish the awful truth that Brady had admitted that he had killed other children, that they were still buried on the moors, and that Myra was implicated. Myra was furious because I had actually been able to document to a degree her guilt in a murder that she had claimed to be innocent of.
The Home Office and the Director of Public Prosecutions asked Greater Manchester Police if they would inquire as to whether or not there was any substance in the claims.
Resources had to be made available to Mr. Topping in manpower and money so that he could finally determine, were there other children up there, and if so, where are they?
Given that we were some 20 years on from the events that had happened in the 60s, people's memories were fading. And the first thing I had to do really was to make arrangements to see Brady. The man wasn't well, clearly. He was in a very, very poor physical condition, very thin, very gaunt, very agitated, constantly walking about his cell. I left with the impression that in the right circumstances, perhaps, he may have spoken more about events surrounding the disappearance of Pauline Reade and Keith Bennett. But my concern then was, where did I go from there? I wanted to go and see Myra Hindley. Myra Hindley had always remained steadfastly silent about her role in events. She was claiming that she really was the innocent, the young girl who had been misled by Brady and had had a passive rather than an active role in any of the murders, if indeed at all. And she just got caught up with him, and her guilt was a consequence of his actions. And so I went to see her in November of 1986. I was told by the staff that she will see you, she'll be polite with you, she'll listen to what you've got to say, but really don't expect any help. We don't think that you're likely to be successful. But I went to see her because I wanted the fact that I'd gone there to become known to Brady. She had told me that she'd received a letter a few days before from Mrs. Johnson, that's Keith Bennett's mum, appealing for help in locating the grave or any information surrounding the disappearance of her son. She seemed quite moved by this letter. I made it very clear to her that I couldn't offer her any immunity. I made it very clear to her that I couldn't assist her in any sort of parole whatsoever, and she equally accepted this. We came to the point when she formally confessed.
I think she finally unburdened herself because the new solicitor she had, Michael Fisher, actually managed to get it through to her that she was going to be in prison endlessly and without any hope of reprieve unless she confessed, that people outside prison did not believe the protestations of innocence and never would believe it. He persuaded her that the only way was to unburden herself, make a clean breast of it, present herself in the best possible light, but get on board that she had committed the crimes, get that out of the way, and obviously not expect immediate release, but looking long term to the future. That was the only way she was ever going to get out of prison.
She was concerned that a detailed search was starting within a few days at the moor, and I think she was concerned about Brady. She knew we'd seen Brady in Gartree. She knew I planned to see Brady again, and I think she wanted to get in first on that. She took her time, was very controlled, and told me how each of the victims had been abducted or persuaded to be brought to the scene of their subsequent murders. It was really an extremely and well-rehearsed performance from her, though in doing it, the information that she was giving me was certainly placing her as a principal in the offence of murder. She just wanted to tell me about each of the victims, how it had happened, and give as much information as she could which would help us to recover the bodies of the missing victims, Pauline Reade and Keith Bennett. What she did say, and this is what brought the turnabout of events quite dramatically to the inquiry that I was then conducting, was that she would be willing to go to Saddleworth Moor to point out areas of interest. I was hoping that we could have brought her to the moor without any real publicity. She was flown up by helicopter onto the moor. The weather was very poor. There was a lot of snow blowing around, and the media, in their anxiety to cover the event fully, caused me a great deal of problems. I didn't want a media circus around me when I was trying to get from her the information I needed. And it was done against a backcloth of driving wind, of snow blowing about, of helicopters circling overhead, and a woman who had been in prison for 20 odd years who was, to be fair, a little confused. Brady was somewhat different. Brady, when he confessed, would only talk about 2 murders, and that was Pauline Reed's and Keith Bennett's. He wouldn't talk about the other murders that he'd been convicted of. My interviewing of Brady was totally different to that of Myra Hindley. He would not allow me to have another police officer with me. He would not allow me to take notes. And I spent probably more hours with Brady than I did with Hindley. He would always talk around the events. I was always seeking to persuade him to assist me to point out these grave sites. Brady was always wanting to have control of the situation. He would always want to put on conditions as to what he wanted in return. He first of all wanted his solution, and his solution was that I too came up onto Saddleworth Moor. He pointed out the 2 sites, which he said he could do without any trouble or difficulty very quickly, and then he was brought back to the prison and was given the means to kill himself. Now, he said this in front of me. He said this in front of me when I was with his solicitor. Clearly a nonsense. He knew that that was impossible.
Eventually, Brady dropped his demands, but his visits to the moors proved fruitless. With the passage of time, the terrain had changed, and the police were unable to find anything. But they were to have more luck after a second visit by Hindley.
The next time that she came up was in March of '87. She was brought up by road, and by that time she'd confessed. Of course, it was somewhat different. I managed to get her onto the moor without the media being aware of it. We could then discuss the murders. We could discuss what had happened, where it had happened, where she'd parked her vehicles, where the boy, Keith Bennett, was taken onto the moor. We believed, as did other people who had had anything to do with this case, that the victims had been killed in houses, not on the moor, and had been taken up on the moor and carried onto the moor and buried. The terrain on the moor is very difficult to walk on. To be carrying a body and walking on the moor is extremely difficult. And given that Leslie Ann Downey's body and John Kilbride's body had been found within 100 yards of the road, near Hollin-Brown Knoll, we assumed that that would be the case in connection with any bodies that had been buried there. The pattern of the systematic search was that every area that we searched, and before we searched it, we logged it, was to take the layers of the earth away, which would show whether there'd been any disturbance of those layers, and we would know right away whether or not there'd been any digging in those areas.
Topping concentrated part of his search around an area called Hollin-Brown Knoll, where 20 years earlier, police had found the body of Leslie Ann Downey.
We had searched Hollin-Brown Knoll very thoroughly, and we were getting away from what we considered to be the hot spots, if you like, as to where we might find the body. She worked very hard trying to locate areas which she was saying at that stage were of significance. She didn't sort of spare herself in any way, shape or form. I have to say that she did all that she possibly could to assist me to locate those 2 graves. I discussed with her in detail the night in question, and she could recall, which she'd never said before, that when she'd been on the moor near where Pauline was, she could see rocks silhouetted against the night sky. Now that took you further back into the moor on Holland Brownell, and so we then were concentrating on the grassland behind the peat beds. And of course, we found the grave site of Pauline Reed, which in many ways wasn't something that we were overjoyed about. We were saddened by it, but nevertheless, it gave us a great deal of feeling of fulfillment, of having achieved an objective which we never really hoped we could have achieved at one stage of the inquiry. Certainly when we set out, we didn't. The body was remarkably well preserved. I certainly had no doubt in my mind that it was Pauline, from the clothing, from the shoes. On the day that she went missing, I understand that she'd bought a pair of white high heel court shoes. Like a lot of her personal effects, the court shoes were in pristine condition. All the gold writing which is stamped on the inside of ladies' court shoes, or certainly was in those days, was as though it showed as though it had just come out of the box. It was sparkling.
I was in hospital at the time, and I had her shoes brought to me. It's a terrible feeling. Out of my mind I was, really. It was a dark world. I always had a living hope that she was about somewhere. I never thought that she was dead or anything happened to her in any way. I had that living hope that she was alive and walking about somewhere, you know, and I was always looking. I even done Avon's job, so going from house to house thinking to find her in one of the houses. I was always ready with my coat on to run out as soon as daylight came. I went miles on my own, travelling, you know, on the buses and everything, and thinking I'd seen her and running after, getting on one bus and I'd be running after that bus. I never thought Mara Hindley or Ian Brady was to do with it at all, because her sister was a near neighbour, lived next door but one, Maureen. And she went visiting there. Mara Hindley was talking to me normally and saying she was sorry about Pauline, knowing she'd done that. I didn't think till after, you know, it all came back to me, what was what.
I would sum the pair of them up as evil. Brady ill, mentally ill. Myra Hindley so intrinsically evil that she was prepared to go along with his, what should have been obvious as an illness. And at the bottom line, you can't make excuses, you can't mitigate. You have to say that they committed crimes that were evil, beyond belief, beyond anything that the rest of us can even contemplate.
Today we have, of course, the facilities to quite easily video and take pictures and movies, make movies of various things in the home. It's readily accessible. But when you look and see what they, Hindley and Brady, were doing, that they taped the torture of Leslie Ann Downey. They took still black and white photographs of Leslie Ann Downey being tortured. They're there, she's undressed, she's obviously been hurt, she's crying for help, she wants to get away. Today, I've no doubt that Brady and Hindley would take a film, they would take a video, and they would produce what is commonly termed today as the typical snuff movie. That's what they were doing for their own gratification in 1965.
I've spent a lot of time with the case. I've had the benefit of absorbing the work that was done by the officers, you know, the excellent work that the officers undertook in the 60s. And of course, I've reviewed the case, I've had the benefit of the confession of Hindley, a very detailed and rambling confession on occasions of Hindley. And I've had many hours with her also and with Brady. But to sum it up, really what they were about was just pure evil. They set out to abduct and murder small children. And without her help and cooperation and her probably pleasing manner, none of this could have taken place. And if she took no greater part in it than to what she's confessed, well, let us accept that. She really was and is a very, very evil woman.
For a long time, I put an extra plate out, counting the 7 children, you know. And I bought presents the first year after his 13th birthday, but I've still got a card actually that I bought them. If he turned up that day, I wrote on the card. It wasn't a good time, that 2 years. It was a big relief when he was found.
I'm on 11 tablets and sleeping tablets, and I've been on them for 30 odd years, and I can't go to sleep without them. She's always in my mind and in my thoughts.
She's not suffering now. Nobody can hurt her now. I feel her that close now, you see, so that seems to put me up a lot. I feel her so close to me. But I miss her very much, I still do. She's my little girl.
They were terrorised and abused and killed in a lonely and inhospitable part of the world. They were taken away from the comfort of their mothers and families. The whole thing is horrendous.
One day I will find him, because he's up on them moors on his own. They've all been found but him, and there's no way I'm going to give up till I find him. And I won't rest till he is found and put to rest in a grave, a proper grave.
Winnie Johnson continues to go up there because she naturally, and quite rightly, understands that to be the gravesite of her son. It's very sad that we were not successful in locating Keith Bennett's gravesite.
We'll find him one day. We'll have to dig a hole and moors up, we'll find him.